So welcome everybody. I'm still letting a whole bunch of people in. This has been a very popular event. We've had over 100 people sign up for it. So we're very excited about that. So I have to keep pressing this button to let people in as they come. So we have people not only joining on Zoom, but we also have people joining on live stream. So that's via Facebook and YouTube. We welcome all to leave a comment just to see if the comments are working. Just leave a comment there with your favorite animal. What's your favorite animal? And while you're doing that, those of you that are watching on live stream or on YouTube, we won't be monitoring the chat this time. So you won't have a chance to ask any questions, unlike the people on Zoom. So just enjoy, sit back and relax. Firstly, a big thank you to Fiona Anthony from nplaw for giving up her time. She was burning the midnight oil last night trying to put her slide together, so much appreciated. So I'm going to kick things off with a poll, because this is really, I think due to the popularity of this event, having over 100 people joining us, or registering, it is a hot topic. So I'm just going to run this poll here, if you don't mind filling it out, just to see where you're at in terms of this topic of code of conduct, bullying, etc. So I'll launch that right now, so feel free to fill it out. And while that is running, so the question is, with that poll, have you ever personally experienced or supported someone who has been subjected to any of those behaviors listed there? So if you haven't, then don't fill it out. So my name is John Fagan and I'm the CEO at Scribe. Some of you may already be Scribe customers or have heard of us. Just to give a brief intro while you're filling out the poll, Scribe is a software company and we build software specifically tailored for parish and town and community councils. We're focused on increasing your productivity, reducing the risks with compliancy, and then giving you access to what is now we can say is award-winning support and expertise. So that's for our customers, and that's our day job. Our hobby is doing events like this. So we do provide these free training events open to anybody in the industry. We don't do a sales push on this, and all the talks are based on theory and practice. So it doesn't matter what software you're using, you're welcome to come along. Currently, we have over 750 town and parish councils across England and Wales. And now really our mission is to make local communities work smarter by modernizing their systems. So we are geeks. We are based in Norfolk. I'm not sure if any of you have been to North Norfolk. Very small team. Really, the company's actually existed for 30 years, but it was acquired by our founder a few years ago, and we're just focused on, doing the best we can do for the community. So we've got 45 people have responded to that. So I think I'll publish those 78%. That's a lot. So this is really a bit sad, actually, that so many people on this call have experienced some of those negative behaviors during their work. So yeah, it's sad, but it is, I guess, the situation we have. So I'm going to be handing over to Fiona now, who I'll keep the poll open actually, and then I'll share. Maybe I'll share it, because you guys, can't see the results. So actually I'll share it right now. So let me just grab a screenshot of it. I don't know where it goes. There we go. Ending poll. So as you can see there, it should be popping up on your screen. Most people felt disrespected, and then in second place is intimidated, harassed, bullied, discriminated. Not great to hear that at all. And then a small minority, but still significant, physically abused while they're working. So that is really, actually really sad to hear. Because this is the reason why I started working for Scribe. because I was just amazed by how many people are doing good things for their community, particularly because so many people are volunteering or working, unpaid. So it is, really sad to see those results there. So I'm going to hand over now to Fiona, who's going to hopefully give us some guidance and advice on how to deal with some of these challenges that people might experience in their workplace. Over to you, Fiona.
Okay, so thank you to John. Thank you all of you for giving up your morning to come along and to talk with us. So I'm going to talk about bullying and the law and the updated model code of conduct. So I'm a solicitor at nplaw, which is a shared legal service for Norfolk County Council and various district councils in Norfolk. We also work with other local authorities across England and Wales, including town and parish councils. I have a really wide-ranging role. I feel like I'm very lucky in what I do. And one of the things I do is advise on and undertake standards investigations. Before I joined nplaw, I was an independent person under the Localism Act for a district council for a number of years. So I saw my fair share of complaints from town and parish councils. So I'm going to talk to you today about the topic of bullying, but sort of within the framework of the LGA Model Code of Conduct. I'll talk for around half an hour. There's going to be plenty of time for questions, either as we go along or at the end. So please just put something in the chat, or I think you can probably raise your hand as well, although I'm not sure I'm going to see it. I am not very techie. So what I would say is,
I'll be taking care of the questions. Yeah. So we'll try and hold them toward the end so we can, keep you in the flow, and then people can drop a question in the chat, or if they've got a mic, they can ask them and raise their hand. That's right. Thank you, Fiona.
That's brilliant. So I'm going to share my screen, I hope. And I can't quite get to the slideshow from the beginning. So let's see if we can get there. There we go. Is that showing up, John?
Yeah, that's all perfect.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. I do have notes with me just because things pop in and pop out of my brain. And so apologies if I'm not always looking at you. It's always really difficult, isn't it, to know where to look when there's a screen. So I thought we'd start by looking at the current standards regime, and my goodness, David Cameron and Nick Clegg seem like a long time ago. But when they came into power in 2010 with the coalition government, they wanted to get rid of lots of red tape, and they decided to bring in the Localism Act 2011. And that's the standards regime under which we now all operate. So the idea obviously is for local authorities to promote and maintain high standards of conduct. And what the Localism Act, amongst a lot of other things, but what it did was it introduced local codes of conduct based on the Nolan principles, which I'll talk about in a moment. It also brought in local responsibility for investigating any alleged breaches of codes of conduct. And that's in stark contrast to how the old regime operated, because that was centralised with the Standards Board. The monitoring officer had a central role in establishing and maintaining a register of members' interests. And there was also the introduction of a new criminal offence of failing to comply with statutory requirements for disclosure of pecuniary interests. There was also the introduction of having an independent person who would kind of filter and monitor any complaints around codes of conduct breaches. So I mentioned the 7 principles of public life, or the Nolan principles, named after Lord Nolan, who is pictured here. He was the first chair of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And I always think this is quite interesting because he and his committee introduced these 7 principles that should be upheld by anyone who serves the public or delivers public services. So that includes ministers, civil servants, councillors, and local authority officers. I think probably if I kind of put you all in a room, it's the kind of things that you would come up with if you were thinking about what you want from people who are in public life. And I won't go through those in a lot of detail, but it's something that as councillors you sign up to, and also as local authority officers, that's also what we sign up to. I myself am a local authority officer. So there was a review of standards. So the Localism Act itself indicated that the government would look to review the Act 5 years after it took effect. And so the Committee on Standards in Public Life consulted widely and looked at all the, took a lot of evidence and did a review basically of local government ethical standards, which included town and parish councils. And the report was issued on the 30th of January 2019, which seems like many lifetimes ago now. And it found that the majority of councillors maintain high standards of conduct, but there were also a number of different recommendations around the regime and around code of conduct standards. So I've put on the slide, there was 26 recommendations for change, which were mainly for the government to implement, and that's because they needed legislation, either primary legislation, so an act of parliament, or some regulations. It also introduced 15 best practice solutions. So these were things that could be implemented straight away. There was no need to wait for anything to happen, and it was up to local authorities to get on and do. And the Committee on Standards in Public Life's review, the 2019 review, I think is really worth reading. It's 110 pages long, so it does go on a bit. But it's nicely set out. There are lots of examples in it. It's great if you get the printed version, great for killing spiders, and quite good for insomnia as well. So I'd recommend a read if you want to just dip in and out of it. But it covers things which were clearly an issue that came up in the consultation. So things like bullying, use of social media, the issue of councillors and when they are or aren't acting in an official capacity, and therefore whether they are or aren't caught by the code of conduct. They felt that the definition of interests was too narrow. And also the disclosure of pecuniary interests, the rules around that seemed much too complex. And there was also a feeling that actually it wasn't something that should be a criminal matter. And then moving on to actual codes of conduct, what the review said in their best practice solutions was that the codes should include prohibitions on bullying and harassment. And not just that, but also that everyone understood what bullying and harassment was. So useful to have definitions and examples in there. They would also require councillors to comply with formal standards investigations rather than just saying, well, this is a load of rubbish, I'm not taking part in this. And also deal with the problem of trivial or malicious allegations by councillors. They found that there was a lot of kind of tit for tat allegations flying around. So as I said, that was published at the very beginning of 2019, the review, and every so often the committee would write to the government and say, are you doing anything about this? And then finally in 2020, the Local Government Association, the LGA, produced a draft model code of conduct. and this was finalised last year, so in 2021. Now, it's not something that has to be adopted, but it's useful for consistency. And what we've found as well is that particularly where you have what we call twin hatters or even triple hatters, so councillors sitting on different councils, such as the parish, the district and the county, it really helps if they operate under one code. I've also seen a number of different codes where they're very vague. So they may be sort of state general principles, but if you actually wanted to hold someone to account, they're so vague that that's really difficult to do. And also I've seen very precise codes of conduct, which are almost too specific and too definitive and don't therefore capture a lot of behaviour that you might want to hold someone accountable for. So there is a kind of a fine line. So I thought today I'd talk about the Model Councillor Code of Conduct, and the LGA has produced some guidance which helps us with that. And the purpose of the code is to assist councillors in modelling behaviour that's expected of them, and setting out the type of conduct that could lead to action being taken against them. And it's also to protect councillors, to protect local authority officers and the reputation of local government. So the fundamental aim of the code, as it says, is to create and maintain public confidence in the role of councillor and local government. So I'm not going to go through the code in its entirety. I'm just going to pick out the bits that relate to the topic of bullying, which I've been asked to talk about today. Although as a bit of a standards geek, I think the whole code is really interesting and interestingly written. So when does it apply? Well, and this is one of the problems that we were unsure of before, but this clarifies that it will apply as soon as someone signs their declaration of acceptance of the office of councillor, or if they've been co-opted when they attend their first meeting as a co-opted member. And then it will continue until they stop being a councillor. It also applies, and this was the tricky bit, when an individual's actions would give the impression to a reasonable member of the public who has knowledge of all the facts that they're acting as a councillor. And this is one of those tricky ones, isn't it? And so, you know, you get the examples of someone on social media who perhaps calls themselves on Twitter, you know, Councillor X, and they might talk about Councillor Y, and then they say, well, a bit of a disclaimer saying this is my personal view. And you think, well, if you're actually talking about yourself as a councillor and somebody else as a councillor, it probably isn't personal. So again, a bit of a grey area there, but this wording was put in to try and make it a little bit more robust. And again, when does it apply? It applies in all different types of communication and interaction. So I've put a list there, but basically it's everything, everything that a councillor does in terms of communication. And one of the issues particularly, I've put social media communication there because that seems to be a real hot topic. And perhaps something that another time, John, we might go into in a bit more detail, because I think that's a useful thing to think about. But basically, the gist of all of it is really that councillors should uphold high standards of conduct and show leadership at all times when they're acting as a councillor, whatever it is that they're doing. So the code starts setting out some general principles, and they are absolutely as you would expect them to be. So going back to the second slide, I think it was, with the Nolan principles, they set out what the councillor is signing up to. And interestingly, they put it in the first person and they put it in the present tense. So it talks about public trust, and it says, on all occasions, I act with integrity and honesty, I act lawfully, I treat all persons fairly and with respect. I lead by example and act in a way that secures public confidence in the role of councillor. I impartially exercise my responsibilities in the interests of the local community, and I don't improperly seek to confer an advantage or disadvantage on any person. I avoid conflicts of interest. I exercise reasonable care and diligence, and I ensure that public resources are used prudently in accordance with my local authority's requirements and in the public interest. So those are the general principles. And again, the kind of things that you would expect, I think, to see in a code of conduct, that if you were kind of making it up from the beginning. The code then moves, the model code then moves into specifics and specific points. And the very first one, which I think is important, is respect. And as I said at the beginning, I'm picking out certain areas, but this isn't by all means the whole of the code. So the first one states that as a councillor, I treat other councillors and members of the public with respect, and I treat local authority employees and representatives of partner organisations and those volunteering for the local authority with respect, and I respect the role they play. Now, in the draft code that was published in 2020, the wording was originally not respect, but civility. And in the consultations on that draft, that caused a lot of confusion. And I think people didn't really like that word of civility because, I don't know, it's really difficult, isn't it, in terms of what it actually means. But respect seems much more than just being civil to somebody. And the code goes on to say that it means politeness and courtesy in behaviour and speech and the written word. But it doesn't mean that you can't debate something with somebody or have different views, because obviously we want that as part of a healthy democracy. So as a councillor, councillors can express or challenge or criticise or disagree with views, but they have to do so in a respectful way and shouldn't at all subject anybody, individuals, groups, organisations, to any personal attack. Really important that people are treated politely and courteously, and that rude and offensive behaviour basically means that, you know, people are, it kind of lowers the public's expectations and confidence in councillors. And equally though, as a councillor, councillors deserve respect from others, so from other employees and also from members of the public. So the second part of the code, number 2, paragraph 2, is around bullying, harassment and discrimination. And originally in the draft, it was simply bullying and harassment, and then discrimination has been added along with all this. And I'm going to pull each of these out separately. So we'll look at them, but you'll see that as a councillor, I'm not going to bully anyone, harass anyone, and I will promote equalities and not discriminate unlawfully. Again, I think that's interesting. It's not just about not discriminating, it's about promoting equality. So it's a really positive duty on a councillor. So what's bullying? ACAS, the Advisory, Conciliation and Arbitration Service, characterises bullying as offensive, intimidating, malicious or insulting behaviour, an abuse or misuse of power through means that undermine, humiliate, denigrate or injure the recipient. And I think what's really interesting is the poll at the begining. You know, John had set out lots of different behaviours, and I think it's quite shocking actually that most of you know somebody who has been subjected to this sort of behaviour. And bullying might be a, I think I've got okay, so it might be a regular pattern of behaviour, or it could just be a one-off incident. It could happen face-to-face, on social media, in emails or phone calls. It could happen anywhere, in the workplace or even a work social event. Seems to be a bit of blurring around this at the moment. And it actually might not always be obvious to other people, and it might not even be noticed by them, but it's about a perception, somebody's perception of someone else's behaviour towards them. So the first part of paragraph 2 of the code was around bullying. The second part was around harassment. And what harassment is kind of set out in the Protection from Harassment Act 1997. So conduct that causes alarm or distress or puts people in fear of violence. And normally this should involve conduct, a course of conduct. So something that happens on at least 2 occasions. And again, look at the wording of this, it's quite interesting. It's conduct that causes alarm for somebody else. So the person doing it may not actually understand that that's what they're doing, and may not even intend to do that. But it's, again, it's the victim's perception. And it's quite a specific definition. And I've kind of tried to put it into little lines here. So it can include repeated attempts, it has to be repeated, to impose unwanted communications and contact upon somebody in a manner that could be expected to cause distress or fear in any reasonable person. So we become a little bit more subjective here when we talk about a reasonable person. And then discrimination, I think we probably all know about that, but it's somebody being treated unfairly because of a protected characteristic. And the concept of protected characteristics was again brought in by the Equality Act 2010, and they're specific aspects of someone's identity which are defined in the Act. So I always half want to be asked this in a pub quiz and then think maybe not. So there are 11 protected characteristics. I usually manage to get to about 5 and then can't quite remember what they are. So they're set out here: marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, age, disability, and that can be either physical disability or a mental health issue. As race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender reassignment. This slide actually says gender, but it's sex and not gender. Religion or belief, and marriage and civil partnership. So those are all protected characteristics and may be cited in any discrimination claim. So the third part of the code talks about impartiality of officers of the council, and says that as a councillor shouldn't compromise or attempt to compromise the impartiality of anyone who works for or on behalf of the local authority. So basically, officers shouldn't be coerced or persuaded to act in a way that would undermine their neutrality. Officers, so perhaps a parish clerk, can be questioned in a way to understand, for example, why they're suggesting that somebody acts in a particular way, or why they've written something in the way that they've written, but they can't be forced to act differently or change their advice or alter the content of what they've written if doing so would actually prejudice their professional integrity. Oh, so I've seen a poll pop up on my screen.
I've to hit buttons. I fail, it's all shared now, so you see. Yeah. Brilliant.
And that's really interesting, that the levels of disrespect in there. So yeah, that's fascinating actually to see, isn't it? And I'm pleased that physical abuse is relatively small, but it's still quite shocking that it's in there. Okay. So I don't know if I if I move my slide, oh yeah, it will let me move my slide, but I'm not sure if you can see the slide without the poll. Can I press close? There we go.
No, I can see the slide. No poll.
Okay, great. Okay. So I've left in the issue of disrepute as well, because councillors shouldn't bring their role or their local authority into disrepute, not easy to say. But basically councillors are, they're respected in their community, and they have been given a position of power, and therefore they're subject to greater scrutiny than ordinary members of the public. And particularly in public, if it's seen that there might be any disrespect or bullying or something like that, then it could well bring the role or indeed bring the council into disrepute. So it's not wanting me to, there we go. I've left out some of the other bits which are about confidentiality, disclosure of information, things like that, all really important, but I'm not going to manage to fit it in my half hour today. But one of the important bits as well, I think, is that if there is some sort of issue with the code of conduct, then it's really important that a councillor undertakes training, that they cooperate with any investigation, that they don't intimidate anybody who might be involved in those proceedings, and that they comply with any sanctions if those are imposed. So we've talked about a code of conduct. If there's a breach of the code of conduct, then every local authority has to have a mechanism to investigate those allegations, and also arrangements for decision making. And that's under the regime, again, the standards regime under the Localism Act 2011. So each local authority, each principal authority for the parish, town and parish council is going to have their own arrangements, and those should be publicised. And I would hope that everybody understands the different procedures that are available. But if not, go and ask your monitoring officer and ask what the arrangements actually are. If there are any complaints involving the clerk, so sometimes we do see parish clerks who are upset by the conduct of a parish councillor. The Committee on Standards in Public Life, remember back to the beginning, made a recommendation that formal standards complaints about the conduct of a councillor towards a clerk should usually be made by the chair or by the parish council rather than the clerk in all but exceptional circumstances. And that's really around protecting the clerk as an employee. And remember that a clerk is employed by the whole of the parish council and not by individual councillors. And again, that didn't need any legislation. That's simply seen as best practice and seen as a protection for the clerk. So principal authorities, so your district council, your borough council, whatever it might be in your particular area, are responsible for undertaking the formal investigations of any code breaches by parish councillors. So it's not for the parish or town council to make that investigation. And often that's because the town or parish council is going to be very small. There might be a number of people involved who, sometimes may be seen as taking sides. So the idea is that this is something which should be relatively formal, because if someone's making an allegation, it's right that it's properly investigated, but also that it should be, again, independent and fair. So it might be that someone in the principal authority undertakes the investigation, or it might be outsourced. So, for example, we at nplaw do independent investigations for other authorities. And that's quite useful because, again, we have this, we're a step away, and we can have this complete independence. And then once a breach has been found, if a breach is found of the code, it is up to the principal authority to think about sanctions, and those will be binding on the parish councillor. And as I say, that the mechanisms will be different in each authority as to decision making. So I felt we couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk about the main case on standards and bullying, and that's the case of Harvey and Ledbury Town Council. And it's a 2018 case, and it basically involved Councillor Harvey, who was a town councillor in Ledbury, and complaints of bullying and harassment had been made against her by the town clerk and the town clerk's deputy. And the town council decided to deal with allegations of bullying under a grievance procedure, rather than using the process under the authority's code of conduct. Councillor Harvey disagreed with this approach, and she self-referred a code of conduct complaint to the monitoring officer of Herefordshire County Council, which is the principal authority for the area. So that's why that's Herefordshire is also named in there as a defendant. So what Ledbury Town Council had done was they proceeded under their grievance and appeals procedure. They found against Councillor Harvey and they imposed various disciplinary sanctions. However, Herefordshire Council's monitoring officer conducted an external investigation and found that Councillor Harvey hadn't breached the town council's code of conduct. So we have this very difficult situation where there are two panels investigating separately and coming to different findings. So Councillor Harvey brought a judicial review case and was successful. So basically, the outcome of that case was that the Localism Act procedures, so that the procedures under the Act and under the standards regime, have to be adopted and given precedence in cases arising from complaints which could be considered a breach of the code of conduct. And that case, the Harvey case, doesn't actually change the law. It just kind of clarifies really what the law actually is. And it was a very useful case for those of us working in standards. And it also emphasised the need for a fair procedure where an investigation is taking place. So any complaints to be investigated and precise allegations identified. Now, what I came across as an independent person was that often people would make complaints and they were often quite rambling, they were often quite vague, and it felt like something that the monitoring officer and I used to do was to almost articulate the complaints for those people. We almost had to pull out exactly what it was that they were complaining about because it sometimes got lost in the detail. The investigation needs to make sure that the evidence is very clearly identified and, distinguish between who's an actual witness and who can give evidence about something and who just, maybe is a supporter of somebody but doesn't have any direct evidence. Really important that the person who's accused, that sounds quite a strong word there, but the person against whom the complaint is being made has the opportunity to respond to the investigation and can actually say, well, hold on a moment, this isn't right. And then if it is found that there should be some sanctions imposed, that those should be proportionate to the finding. So the sanctions should be proportionate to the alleged or to the breach. Now, sanctions are a really hot topic, and it's very clear that they don't really have very many teeth. So councillors can't be suspended, and the only sanctions really that can be imposed are censure, apology, and training, and people might be removed from any committee responsibilities. Sometimes though, in exceptional circumstances, a councillor can be denied access to facilities and to resources. But those are usually, and that's things like having a laptop or having a building pass in a larger council. But those sorts of things are usually only considered appropriate in response to things like threatening behaviour, such as bullying council officers, and it's an attempt to limit the damage. So as I came to the end of putting all this together, I thought, well, what do we get out of all this? What are our learning points? And the kind of takeaway points for me are that there needs to be good training for councillors on all aspects of the code. And if your council is introducing a new code, it's really important everyone understands what it is that they're signing up to. So again, the principal authority should be providing some training. If you feel that that's not adequate, again, you can go to outside trainers. At nplaw, we offer training on the code, and we can give practical examples that we can work through as well, which is I always think they're really interesting, because there's often grey areas. It can be useful to set protocols, written protocols, to set boundaries so that we all understand what we're working towards. So they can address issues such as councillor officer work relations and appropriate behaviour. So it might be that we say, councillors should only contact the clerk Monday to Friday between 9 and 5, for example. Again, it will depend very much on the size of your council, the type of councillors there are, how the clerk works. But having a document that sets out those working arrangements can head things off fairly early. And again, something which may sound obvious, but if there are problems emerging, then early discussions to sort them out can really make a difference before people become entrenched. If there are any investigations, if we get that far, then they should be fair. And as I said, we can, you can have independent investigations, and then any sanctions need to be proportionate. So I've come to the end really of my slides and what I wanted to say to you. It's a very quick trot through something that I could talk about for days on end, but I'm not going to, you'll be pleased to hear. So I'm very happy to hear any questions. And John, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll facilitate this, Fiona. So if you could unshare your slides. We've got 15 minutes for questions. So I welcome people to come and ask questions. So I'll be calling people out. Otherwise, if you can't, I'll raise your questions. So I've just been keeping a few notes here. So these are the people I will be calling up in this order if we have time up until 12:30. So it'll be Maybeen, Rose Love, Claudette Evans, Carol, Tara, Christopher and Kerry. So we'll start with Maybeen. Are you there, Maybeen?
I am, yes. Hello.
There you are. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I asked whether or not the code that you were talking about, the 2020, was applicable in Wales.
I think it is, but let me get back to you on that.
It's just that all references were parish councils, and I thought, oh no, that's England.
Absolutely. I do a lot of, I have this really wide-ranging role. I do a lot of planning work, and we're finding so much that the law is diverging so much between England and Wales now. So let me check that out for you.
Okay.
My understanding is that it may be different, but let me find out, and I'll also find out if there is a separate code, if indeed it is different.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
But the principles still apply?
Yes, exactly. The overall. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Cool. Rose, yeah, someone's just said there they think it's not applicable to Wales, but yeah, Rose, love, there you are. Oh, Carol, you can give yours. Fire away, Carol.
Good morning. My question is, can we review the code of conduct at our annual parish council? It's a small parish council, when we review all our documentation at one go, and with that it would be recorded in the minutes, but we could also ask each councillor to have a statement to the effect that they agree the content of the code of conduct. And my code of conduct, which I had in 2020, doesn't seem to have para 11.
Okay, what I'll do at the end of this is if I send out all the links to everything, and then you should have absolutely everything that you can have a look at. So certainly, as I say, the draft code of conduct is different from the final model. So you asked a couple of questions there. One was about reviewing your code of conduct. Absolutely, I think it's really important that you should refresh it every year. I would talk to, well, maybe not every year, I can see your eyebrows raising there, but I quite like the idea that it is a living document, isn't it? It's something that should be up to date. It's not something that should just be signed up to once and then stored away and everyone forgets about it, because it's kind of governing everything that you do. So in fact, it's probably more important than all your other policies that you review annually.
I agree.
So I would say yes. I would say maybe talk to the monitoring officer at your principal authority and see whether they're adopting the same thing or whether they're suggesting, because what they can do is diverge from it. Everyone can diverge from it. You don't have to adopt this model code. It may be that the principal authority might say, well, actually, this is the one that we're doing. We've tweaked a bit of the wording here. It would be nice if everyone would sign up to the same thing. So I would just check with them first to see how comfortable they are with you doing it. But ultimately, you are your own governing body. And ultimately, my understanding is, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I think you can do what you want. So I would suggest that, yeah, and again, maybe you don't need to ask everybody to sign up to it each time, but it can be a good reminder that when you bring it out and you review it, you say to everyone, I'm, trusting that you're still happy with this, because this is what you signed up to when you join.
I think of continuity as well. You're keeping a block of that. You are looking at all your documentation that you need to have ratified or assessed in one meeting, if you like. That's where I'm coming from. Ease for me.
Absolutely, and kind of ease for everybody, but as I said, I think it's it's almost your most important document because it's your governance.
I agree.
Set out there. So
thank you very, very much indeed. Most interesting.
Right. Thank you, Carol. Thank you.
Another question here. The person wishes to remain anonymous. There is information. It's a good question. There is information and support for those bullied, intimidated, disrespected by councillors. But what about those officers who are subjected to any of these by the clerk or manager, and they may have no recourse to the councillors as the backlash from the manager be too great? So what about the other way around, because it's very much councillor focused?
So we're saying, sorry, just to turn that around, we're saying the clerk is bullying somebody else.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. They are an employee. They shouldn't be doing that. I would suggest that steps are taken to speak, and again, speak informally. Everything, I feel that as soon as someone is concerned about something, informal steps are best to be taken. before, as I think I said, before positions become entrenched, and before anything escalates. So perhaps some sort of informal chat with the chairman, chairperson, and really treating that clerk as someone who may then be subjected to a disciplinary procedure.
So it falls straight into the employment law and disciplinary procedures because they're paid staff. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Rose Love, are you there? You've been shouting for help.
Yeah, there seem to be multiple model codes of conduct between LGA, now CALC, and then the county association. The council sometimes has its own. And anytime I've ever asked, and other clerks have gone on to the supporting networks, you know, which one do we choose? There's always debate on which one's the best. And some people have said, well, we chose this one, but the county, our MO didn't fall under it. So the complaints we made, they didn't look at because it wasn't matching code of conduct. And then others said, well, we had a matching code of conduct, but then it escalated above the MO and the person above them didn't have the same code of conduct. How do we reconcile as the clerk?
Yeah,
I don't know which model to even take to my council at this point. Our code of conduct is from the early 2000s. It's way outdated. I'm updating everything right now, but I don't know what to take to them, and I worry that if I take one thing to them, even if I call our MO and say, what do you follow? At some point, it might become, I hope it never becomes an issue, but someday it might. So what do I do?
What do? You certainly want to update it.
Yes.
And you've identified the issue that the Committee on Standards in Public Life identified, that there are all these different codes of conduct floating around and you need to follow one. The idea behind the LGA being asked to produce a draft model code was that eventually everyone would follow the LGA code. However, if I would suggest that you talk to the MO of the principal authority, and it's a lot easier because they will be doing any investigating if there are any alleged breaches. It's a lot easier if they have the same code for their authority as you have for your authority. Now that might not be the LGA code, but again, that might just be because they haven't got round to updating it. So I think it's worth a kind of a frank conversation saying, well, tell me what your code is. We would like to adopt a new code. Should we go down the route of what you've got? Oh, actually, maybe I don't like what you've got.
I'll see you on Friday.
Okay. So I would suggest that you do just have this frank conversation. I think sometimes monitoring officers are seen as these lofty people that we can't ever talk to, but you know they are just people, and their job is to support you, and that's what they're there for. So use them. That's what they're paid for. Let's make sure we get our money's worth from them.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Rose. Claudette, you've asked a couple of questions, a really good one about members of the public, but yeah, and you've asked another one. So feel free to join us, or I can.
Yeah, my question is, because where we are, it's not the councillors that have the problem. We have a problem with members of the public. A certain group, a small group, are continuously harassing and intimidating the members of the council. We're even getting letters sent to our homes, and it's just continually ongoing, and it's really sort of slowing up the clogs of the community council. We're based here in Wales.
Yeah, and that's really difficult, isn't it? Because again, there's this kind of fine line between you representing the community and wanting to be accessible, and yet you don't want to be subjected to any abuse or intimidation. And so it's that very fine line around it. I wonder whether it might be worth, and again, difficult when it's gone so far, but it might be worth putting in a kind of a protocol, a sort of operating protocol almost for members of the public.
They just totally ignore it. We've tried that. We've told them letters should be sent to the clerk.
Yeah.
And they just bypass that all the time.
Well, perhaps the point comes if you just say to them, letters have to be sent to the clerk and no correspondence is going to be read if it's not. So sometimes that's what has to happen. You might want to think about having a vexatious complainant policy, because sometimes that works and sometimes you'll have one key person who will respond to all those people. But if they think that, and again, it is this fine line about being elected and being democratic and transparent. So it's saying we have this point of contact, you go to that point of contact, and anything else will just be totally ignored. I will not read your emails. I will not, they'll be deleted unless they come through the proper channels.
Yeah, I think we are at the point of a vexatious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have a policy on that, that's really quite useful, because you can point to them and say, the point has come really where we have to start doing this. And we don't like doing it because we want to be accountable, open, transparent, democratic, all that. But actually, if councillors are feeling intimidated, then that really isn't a good thing.
No, because the problem is that it's going to put people off becoming community councillors.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. So there has been a report recently into intimidation by members of the public, I think to MPs. But let me find that and let me put that in the links that I send around, and see if that's something that may be helpful. I don't know if they might make some helpful suggestions in there.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's all we got time for. We've got a lot more questions. So Fiona did offer to answer them all afterwards. Actually, I think we'll probably put a blog post together with something, we won't mention your names or anything like that. We'll just put some of the Q&A in there as well, along with Fiona's links, and then I'll send it out to you, everybody, along with the copy of the presentations and this video. I haven't asked Fiona, but if we were to get her back, and you wanted, you didn't have enough time and there's other topics you wanted to cover, what would you just drop a comment in the chat what you want covered, and then we'll see if we can do that. Otherwise, thanks to you so much to Fiona for giving her up time to join us today. And also, if you're interested in talking to us at Scribe, want to know a bit more about what we do in building, providing software for town and parish councils. We have account systems, bookings, and cemetery, and we're working on allotments right now. So feel free to drop a message in the chat, and we'll give you a call. Otherwise, hope you have a good lunch now, I guess, unless you've been eating it. Well, so take it easy, everybody. Cheers.